Every now and then, words are spoken that don't just fill the air, they change it. They don't just reach our ears, they reach our hearts. They don't just inform us, they transform us. What makes a speech truly great isn't the cleverness of the words, but the clarity of the purpose behind them. We remember the speeches that moved us, not because they told us what to do, but because they reminded us why we do it. A great speech becomes timeless when it speaks to the very essence of being human, our fears, our hopes, our struggles, and our dreams. And today, I want to take you on a journey into the heart of what makes a speech not just memorable, but one of the greatest ever. Because in understanding greatness, we find the courage to create it ourselves. When we look at some of the greatest speeches in history, there is always a common thread, a golden thread that binds them all together. It is not the structure of the speech, not the vocabulary, and not even the length. It is the ability to start with why. Human beings are naturally drawn to meaning before detail, to purpose before instruction. When a leader, a thinker, or a visionary stands on a stage and begins to speak, what grips an audience is not the information they will provide, but the reason that information matters. A great speech, the kind that lives beyond its moment in time, does not begin with what we need to do or how we are going to do it. It begins with why this matters. When Martin Luther King Jr. declared, "I have a dream," he did not outline a 10-point policy plan. He did not begin by telling people what laws must be passed. He began with a vision, a reason that stirred the soul, of why that transcended politics and spoke directly to humanity. The what and how came later. The why was what made the world listen. This is why people who never even read his speeches in full still know those words. The why has a way of searing itself into our collective memory. Too often, when people prepare to speak, they focus on impressing an audience with knowledge, statistics, or clever phrasing. But history shows us that people don't rally around data, they rally around belief. A great speech works because it aligns with something we already feel deep inside, something we've longed for, but maybe never put into words. It gives us permission to believe again. When you start with why, you are not convincing people. You are reminding them of what they already know to be true, but perhaps had forgotten. That is the power of beginning with purpose. Consider how leaders ignite movements. They don't stand before crowds and start with figures, facts, and reports. They tell us why this cause matters, why this moment cannot be ignored, why we cannot remain the same. And when people hear that clarity, they lean forward, they pay attention, they open themselves to be moved. The words sink deeper not because of eloquence alone, but because they are anchored in a cause greater than the words themselves. The what of a speech may inform us, the how may guide us, but it is always the why that inspires us. Without it, the speech becomes forgettable, lost in the noise of daily conversation. With it, the speech takes on a life of its own, echoing long after the final words are spoken. We quote lines not because they were clever, but because they spoke to purpose. We share them across generations because they ignite something timeless in us. When you craft a message, beginning with why changes not only how your audience hears you, but how they feel you. People may not remember every detail of what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel, and that feeling is born in the clarity of purpose. Starting with why is not a technique. It is the foundation. It is what separates the speeches that vanish from the speeches that live on as some of the greatest ever given. The power of words has always been measured not in their complexity, but in the clarity of the purpose that carries them. Words by themselves are only sounds, but when they are wrapped in meaning, when they are aimed at something greater, they gain weight and direction. A powerful speech is never about the number of words spoken or the length of the delivery. It is about how precisely the speaker connects every word to a central reason. That clarity of purpose is what transforms a collection of sentences into a message that people cannot forget. Think of the greatest speeches in history. They were not filled with jargon or over-polished language. They were clear, direct, and purposeful. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address lasted only a few minutes, yet it is etched into history because its purpose was crystal clear: to remind a divided nation of what it was fighting for. The words were chosen carefully, not to impress with intelligence, but to cut through noise and reach the human spirit. That clarity gave his words an enduring strength that textbooks and generations continue to repeat. Clarity of purpose gives words the ability to pierce confusion. In a world overflowing with opinions, statistics, and constant chatter, people crave simplicity, not complication. They want to know, in the most human sense, why it matters. A speech that is clear about its purpose becomes a lighthouse in the fog. It doesn't need to be long or overly detailed because the audience leaves with one powerful idea that cannot be shaken. When a speaker lacks clarity, the audience feels it instantly. People may politely listen, but the words drift away like leaves in the wind. There is no anchor. But when a speaker steps forward with absolute conviction and clear intent, the audience senses it. They don't just hear the words, they believe them. Clarity makes communication magnetic. It pulls people closer because they want to align themselves with something meaningful, something that resonates with their own sense of truth. Great leaders understand this principle instinctively. They know that the strength of their message is not in overwhelming people with endless information, but in focusing on the heart of the matter. A speech is not a data dump, it is a transfer of belief. And belief can only be transferred when the words are stripped of clutter and sharpened by purpose. That is why simplicity often beats sophistication. The more direct the purpose, the more unforgettable the speech becomes. Clarity of purpose also builds trust. When people sense that a speech is guided by a clear reason, they are more likely to believe in the speaker. Confusion breeds doubt, but clarity creates confidence. Even if people don't agree with every point, they respect the honesty of purpose behind the message. That is why some of the shortest, simplest speeches are remembered for centuries, while longer, more polished ones fade into obscurity. The real power of words is not found in their sound, but in the certainty of their meaning. It is the alignment of words with purpose that allows a speech to ignite emotion, stir courage, and inspire action. Without clarity, even the most beautiful phrases become noise. With clarity, even the simplest phrase can become immortal. When words serve a clear and undeniable purpose, they do not just inform the mind, they transform the spirit. A timeless speech does not belong to one moment, it stretches across generations because it speaks to something deeper than current events. It addresses the truths that all humans share, no matter where they come from or what era they live in. Fear, hope, love, freedom, struggle, and the desire to be remembered. These are universal experiences. When a speaker touches these themes, the words outlive the moment. They become more than speeches, they become legacies. The speeches that endure are not tied to the details of their time, but to the emotions and values that transcend it. When we hear, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," the context may have been the Cold War, but the message is timeless. It resonates because the call to service, responsibility, and contribution is something every generation must face. Greatness is not in delivering words relevant only for today, but in crafting words that still hold meaning decades, even centuries later. What makes this timelessness possible is the ability of a speaker to rise above circumstance. Anyone can comment on the issues of their day, but the great communicators connect those issues to eternal human struggles. They take the immediate and tie it to the infinite. Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking in a particular moment of racial injustice, but his dream reached beyond laws and policies. It touched the universal yearning for equality, dignity, and justice. That is why people around the world, far from his time and place, still quote his words. He was speaking to something every human being understands. Timeless speeches also use simple, universal language. They avoid overcomplication because universality requires accessibility. When a speech is full of technicalities or culture, specific details, its life is limited. But when it speaks in images that anyone can see, in feelings anyone can recognize, it expands far beyond its original audience. Consider how Lincoln spoke of a new birth of freedom. Those words carry weight across time because freedom is not bound to a single year or nation. It is a universal longing. The ability to speak to universal truths also demands courage. It requires the speaker to trust that simplicity is enough, that speaking from the heart about the things that matter most will resonate more deeply than cleverness. Audiences may forget cleverness, but they never forget authenticity. When the words are rooted in truth, they do not age. They remain fresh because truth does not expire. A timeless speech is also one that people see themselves in. It is not about the speaker's greatness, but about awakening greatness in the audience. The universal truths it addresses are not distant ideals, but reflections of what people feel inside. That is why people return to them in times of uncertainty. They are reminders that the struggles of today are not unique and that humanity has always risen by holding on to the same values. The mark of a speech that speaks to universal truths is that it becomes a source of guidance, hope, and courage long after the speaker is gone. People do not only quote it, they live by it. It becomes a part of culture, a piece of human heritage, something passed down not as a memory of a person, but as a gift to humanity. This is what separates a good speech from a timeless one, its ability to touch the universal truths that make us human and remind us of what we all share, no matter when or where we live. Emotion is the heartbeat of every great speech, and without it, words remain lifeless. Logic can persuade the mind, but it is emotion that moves the heart, and only when the two are combined does a message truly endure. A speaker who relies only on logic may win an argument, but a speaker who weaves emotion into logic has the power to win people. Emotion creates connection. It builds the invisible bridge between the one speaking and the many listening. That bridge is what allows logic to cross over and take root. When we reflect on the speeches that changed the course of history, it is clear that they were built on emotion first. They spoke to the pain, the hope, the fear, and the courage of their audiences. Winston Churchill did not stand before his people and present them with statistics about war. Instead, he infused his speeches with emotion, resilience, defiance, and unshakable belief in victory. It was that emotional strength that gave logic a place to live, because once people felt connected, they were ready to believe in the strategy. Emotion opened the door for logic to stay. Emotion is universal. It is the language every human being understands. We may not share the same culture, background, or experiences, but we all know what it feels like to long for freedom, to fear loss, or to dream of a better tomorrow. That is why emotion is such a powerful force in speeches. It bypasses the barriers of intellect and cuts directly into the human core. Once emotion captures attention, logic sustains it. Emotion gives us the spark, logic gives us the reason to keep the fire burning. Without emotion, logic feels cold. People may nod their heads, but they won't feel compelled to act. Without logic, emotion may inspire temporarily, but it will fade quickly. Together, however, they create balance. Emotion lifts people up, and logic keeps them grounded. This balance is what allows a great speech to be both memorable and actionable. It inspires the heart while guiding the mind. Take, for example, the phrase, "We'll choose to go to the moon." John F. Kennedy did not overwhelm his audience with calculations, engineering details, or probability charts. Instead, he touched their hearts with emotion, speaking about challenge, vision, and courage. Only after stirring that emotion did he allow the logic of science and progress to follow. That single sentence became iconic not because of its technical accuracy, but because of the emotional courage it carried. The most successful communicators are those who understand when to lean into emotion and when to ground their message in logic. They tell stories, paint pictures, and use tone and pacing to reach the heart. Then, once the audience is open, they bring in facts and reasoning to strengthen the belief. This rhythm of speaking, emotion first, logic second, is what transforms listeners into believers. A speech that connects only to the mind may be remembered for a moment, but a speech that connects first to the heart will be remembered for a lifetime. Emotion is what people will quote years later. Logic is what ensures that the emotion is not wasted. Greatness in speech comes when the heart and the mind work together, when emotion invites people in and logic gives them the path to walk forward. It is in this union that words become more than just spoken sounds, they become a force capable of shaping history. Greatness in speeches is never measured by the sound of applause in the moment, but by the ripples that speech creates long after the audience has left. A thunderous standing ovation might feel like success, but history shows that the most powerful speeches were not always celebrated at first. Many were even criticized, doubted, or ignored in their time. Yet their true measure of greatness became clear in the way they shifted perspectives, inspired action, and reshaped societies. Applause is temporary, impact is permanent. When a speech has impact, it does more than entertain or impress. It plants a seed in the minds and hearts of the audience. That seed may not sprout immediately, but over time it grows into change. Change in the way people think, act, and live. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address was received with mixed reactions in the moment, some calling it too short or unimpressive. But today, it is regarded as one of the most powerful speeches ever delivered. The reason is simple. Its impact endured long after the noise of applause had faded. Impact is also measured in how a speech influences not only those who heard it live, but generations who encounter it later. A truly great speech speaks so clearly to values, courage, and vision that it continues to inspire people who were never in the room when it was first given. That is why Martin Luther King Jr.'s words are studied in schools, quoted in movements, and echoed in protests decades later. The applause that day in Washington was real, but it was the change his words fueled in hearts and policies that marked their true greatness. Applause is about performance. Impact is about transformation. A performer can earn claps through charisma, humor, or delivery, but a leader moves people toward change. When people leave the room remembering only the style, the speech is soon forgotten. When they leave carrying an idea that reshapes how they see the world, the speech becomes unforgettable. Greatness lies not in impressing, but in influencing. Consider how many powerful figures have delivered long, passionate speeches that earned cheers, yet quickly disappeared from memory. The applause was loud, but the impact was shallow. Contrast that with words that at first seemed ordinary, but later became immortal. Greatness is always tested by time. If words still move us years later, still guide us when we face struggles, then those words were truly great. The reason impact matters more than applause is because speeches are not meant to be performances. They are meant to be catalysts. They are meant to awaken something inside people that does not end with the event. Applause marks the end of a speech, but impact marks the beginning of change. That is why a truly great speech doesn't chase applause. It chases meaning. It is rooted in the belief that one idea, spoken clearly and passionately, can ripple out into the world and alter lives. Measuring greatness by applause is like judging a tree by the sound of its falling leaves. Measuring greatness by impact is like judging it by the strength of its roots and the fruit it bears for generations. Words that shift thinking, ignite hope, or call people to courage become part of history. They are remembered not for how loudly the audience clapped, but for how deeply the audience changed. That is the essence of a speech whose greatness is defined by impact, not applause. The best speeches are not the ones that entertain us for a few minutes. They are the ones that light a fire inside us and push us toward action. A great speech does not stop at being heard. It demands to be lived. It is not enough for the audience to leave inspired. The true power of a speech is measured by what people do after the words are spoken. The most memorable speeches do not just ask us to listen, they ask us to rise, to move, to build, to change. Inspiration without action fades, but inspiration that drives action becomes history. When we hear speeches that have stood the test of time, they almost always contain a call to action, a challenge that stirs people to do something beyond themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. did not simply paint a dream of equality. His words called people to march, to organize, to demand justice. John F. Kennedy's speech about going to the moon did not remain a lofty idea. It sparked a national mission that altered the course of science and technology. These speeches worked because they refused to stop at emotional uplift. They converted belief into behavior. The finest communicators understand that audiences don't want to just feel good in the moment. They want to know how to channel that feeling into something meaningful. A great speech makes people ask themselves, what role do I play in this story? By showing them the possibility of their own contribution. The speech transforms passive listeners into active participants. People remember the words because they became part of the journey those words set into motion. A speech that only inspires us to listen is incomplete. Words may echo beautifully, but if they do not translate into action, they eventually vanish. That is why applause alone is never the goal. The goal is movement. Leaders do not speak to be admired, they speak to awaken something dormant in others. When the speech ends, the real work begins, and the audience carries forward the message not just in memory, but in action. Even the structure of a great speech reflects this. It begins with emotion to connect, uses logic to ground that emotion, and ends with a call that makes action feel possible. That final step is crucial, because without it, inspiration has no outlet. It is like filling a balloon with air but never letting it fly. The best speeches give people direction, a sense of clarity about what they can do next. Whether it is as simple as thinking differently, speaking up, or joining a collective cause. What separates the greatest speeches from the rest is their ability to leave footprints in the real world. They do not remain confined to the stage or the page. They show up in movements, in changed lives, in societies reshaped. They remind us that the power of words is not in how they sound when spoken, but in what they make possible when acted upon. This is why we look back at these moments not just as beautiful words, but as turning points in history. The test of any speech is not how loudly the audience claps, not how inspired they feel in the moment, but what they do the next day, the next week, the next decade. The greatest speeches are not monuments of language. They are catalysts of action. They inspire us not only to listen, but to act, to step into the arena of life, carrying with us the spark that those words ignited. It is in that transformation from inspiration to action that a speech becomes truly great.